Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen. Well, here we are. Day numero uno of the new regime. All right, so as we're looking forward here, what I'm going to be doing is pretty much business as usual. Okay, you guys hopefully saw the video that I posted up yesterday, kind of giving us an idea of what it is that we're going to be doing with our class periods. I use that term very, very loosely. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take you through a lovely and fantastic set of notes. As you guys can see right here, we're going to keep on moving. We're going to be talking about American power and the war at home. Hey, look, there's me. Hi, guys. So you'll still be able to see me as we go through this. There will be moments where I kind of pop in, and then I pop out, and then I pop right back in again. Yay. Aren't we excited? Alrighty, guys. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and let's jump right into slide numero uno. So as we were going in to World War I, we weren't really prepared all that much. Really, when it came down to it, we were in a pretty rough spot. After the Spanish-American War, we'd kind of remobilized ourselves a little bit. But as presidents tend to do, when they come in, they start to make some changes. And so you see varying parties, and then they decide, hey, you know what? This president did this president did that. Cool. I'm going to go ahead and change it up completely. So since we weren't really in an active war at that point in time, really in that early part of the 1900s, we didn't really have much call for an army. And so what we did is once this whole thing popped off for us, once the Lusitania was sunk, once we now officially had some skin in the game with this entire war, we had to figure out how to make our army large and superior and better than anybody else's before the other guys decided to come and attack us. So we had to use what was called the Selective Service Act. Okay, so the Selective Service Act is something that is actually still around today. So, gentlemen, when you turn 18 in a couple of very short years here, you're going to find yourself in the position where you're going to actually have to register for the Selective Service Act. And so what that means is that now you will be essentially on call. So if the Army gets into a conflict and they realize, hey, we need to have some more people at a moment's notice here to go off and fight, cool. They're going to give you a call, and they're going to say, hey, we need troops. Come on in. You're part of the family now. And, oh, yeah, it's non-negotiable, and it is not legal for you to pass up this lovely offer that we're making to you. So if you get brought in by the draft, you're in. Okay? Not exactly the most ideal position, but the good thing is that really when it comes down to, we have a huge volunteer force. So the chances of you actually having to be drafted are pretty darn slim. So rest easy, gentlemen. It's all good. All right, so not only do we have to get our people prepared, but we also had to get our economy prepared for this whole thing as well. Now, we see a lot of what's happening back then now starting to come around once again, except we're in a different kind of a war this time, right? With this whole virus thing going on, we have places like car manufacturers, toy makers, and all kinds of other companies that have no business in the medical field. Now, all of a sudden, they're actually being compelled to create masks and create ventilators for the people who are sick with the virus. So this is exactly what we started to see happening with industry in the United States during that time. Now we have to create weapons. We have to create all kinds of different tools and ships that are going to allow us to kind of stay in the fight. Okay, and so we see mass production extending out further into new things like ships. So now instead of ships being kind of handmade, they start putting all of these things together in different spots and then bringing them all together, putting them together quickly, and then pushing them into the water. See you later. So now, with the Lusitania having been sunk by the Germans, well, now we find ourselves needing to protect our goods that are going across the ocean. So we start actually utilizing what are called convoys. And essentially what a convoy is a group of ships that follow a merchant ship. So let's say we're shipping over a whole bunch of weapons. Well, so far, the Germans have showed us that if there are goods coming over, they will absolutely try to shoot those ships down as best as they possibly can. And so we need to make sure all of our stuff is protected, not just cruise liners, but all of our military stuff as well. And so we start putting together these convoys of battleships that are going across the ocean. And as we start doing that, the losses drop dramatically because, of course, now these ships are protected. Now, we get into this fight pretty late in the game. There have been 2.5 years of fighting up to this point, and it's primarily been all European forces that have been fighting up to this point. And so now that we're being brought in, we're kind of a nice little boost, an adrenaline boost for some of the Europeans. Now they have a little bit more renewed hope that this war could actually be won. Okay, American troops come in incredibly large numbers, and they start injecting them first into the Western Front. Now, if you guys remember, the Western Front is where we're looking at all of the trench warfare. So going out into no man's land, okay, trying to take some of that land in the trenches from the other side, which never really worked out too well, unfortunately. So this new enthusiasm really helps to kind of push the Central Powers back just a little bit. Alrighty, so let's continue here. Fighting over there. So as we were prepping to go over to Europe, we actually had a guy by the name of General John J. Pershing. Now, he had been serving in the Army for quite a while, and his prior posting to this was actually in Mexico. Okay, John J. Pershing was out chasing Pancho Villa. We had a little bit of a kerfuffle of sorts going on with Mexico at the time, and so as he was hunting, well, he had to get retasked to go overseas. So he was leading the American Expeditionary Force. And so these guys, their job was to just push their way all throughout Europe and essentially make progress so that they can make it all the way into Germany. Now, in order to do that, we're going to need some new weapons. Now, this is a war that is incredibly unique. This is a war that started off on horseback and ended in tanks, ended with airplanes, ended with really all of the tools that we utilize nowadays for modern warfare. Many of you guys, speaking of modern warfare, now definitely that video game was not based on this particular war, but Battlefield 4. No, I'm sorry, Battlefield 1. What am I thinking? Battlefield 4. Battlefield 1. That right there, some of those weapons are a little exaggerated in there, but a lot of the weapons that you see on there are very much exactly what they utilized back in that time. Okay, they took some liberties within the game, so don't take every last little thing that you see on there seriously. But we see war transition from kind of the, old style on horseback, and they hadn't really been lining up across the field from each other, but many of the same tactics that they utilized in the Civil War is what they started World War I with and ended utilizing tactics that we utilize today and utilizing tools. So we see planes utilizing machine guns. We see tanks coming through and pushing their way through the trenches and through no man's land in order to get over to the other side. One guy in particular, a guy by the name of Frank Luke. Okay, this is the guy that they named Luke Air Force Base here in Phoenix after. He was one of these incredibly talented fighter pilots that we had during that time, and he actually ended up getting a Congressional Medal of Honor. So pretty cool for him. As we can see, there he is, Lieutenant Frank Luke. You guys can see in the upper left, it's kind of an artist rendering of him defeating a plane. We've got him on a machine gun, and then we can see him sitting next to his plane. Definitely a far cry from what we utilize nowadays. Pretty insane to think that that's where it started. They just had a machine gun mounted right up on top of that thing, and they went to it. So war had a lot of issues. And for each of those issues, we attempted to fix it by creating a new piece of technology. Okay, with the new weapons and tactics, trench warfare. This was brutal. Trench warfare was incredibly terrible. It's one of those things that allowed you to kill a lot of the opposing troops. Because as troops made their way over no man's land, they would hit barbed wire and you'd be able to shoot them very easily. You could use poison gas against them. You could use the machine guns and so on. But over time, they started building into something that was really, really nasty. Inside the trenches themselves, they had polluted water, gas from the poison gas grenades, dead bodies. All of this stuff got into the water and got everywhere. So bacteria was just everywhere, infecting your foot, infecting your mouth. So you've got trench foot and trench mouth. Essentially, your body is just rotting from the outside. And for some people, that was enough to take them out completely. Now, if it wasn't just the actual physical aspects of war that were really trying on people, we get to shell shock. Now, nowadays we call this PTSD, but back then they called it shell shock. Some people just couldn't quite take it. The loud noises, the gunfire, everything would kind of trigger them, and they would go into kind of a psychotic breakdown. And this only got worse as time went on. They didn't really have the resources that we have nowadays to deal with that, so they didn't know how to deal with it. Many people ended up resulting in just going home and never talking about the war. And, not talking about it sometimes makes things like that even worse. We also have other things like dysentery, okay, trench foot and trench mouth, as I already mentioned. Life in the trenches was absolutely not a pleasant way to live. Now we're getting ourselves closer and closer to the end of this conflict. When we came in initially, we were actually on the tail end of things. In 1917, that's when the Russians ended up having to pull out of the war. They were dealing with their own issues. They had some revolutionaries come in. By the name of Vladimir Lenin. Now, this guy, he helped to push the Communist Party, and they ended up forcefully overtaking Russia, and now a whole new regime was in place. That regime realized that fighting and trying to set up a brand new government were two things that were not very easily done on an individual basis, but then now having to deal with both at the same time, not a good plan. So they ended up pulling out of the war. Now, what they end up doing in that case is the Americans actually helped to stop the German advance. And so as Russia drops out, America comes in, and they start pushing back on the Central Powers. So there were a lot of people that fought. Now, in our camp, we had one guy really make a bit of an interesting name for himself. His name was Alvin York. Now, Alvin York was an interesting character in the sense that he decided he was going to be a conscientious objector. Pretty much what that means is that he refused to fight. He says that he objected to the war on moral grounds. He didn't want to do any acts of violence against people. However, as the war continued and as he really got out there onto the field, Alvin York changes his tune pretty quickly, realizing how brutal war is, but on top of that, he kind of brings in the godly angle, kind of bringing in the fact that God is smiling on the United States. We're saving the world, and kind of using that moral high ground. And with that, he changes his tune and by himself kills 25 Germans, and ends up capturing 132 prisoners. So pretty big deal. He was, of course, very much recognized at home. He became pretty much an instant celebrity. So now people in the war, the faces of the war, were becoming more and more popular, and it was hitting people at home, not just on the newsreels. Now, by the time we get into the war, very shortly after, in fact, a little bit less than a year, Austria-Hungary surrenders on November 3rd. So at that point, we have pretty much a full-on collapse of the Central Powers. The Germans are exhausted. They've been fighting for years. We might have just gotten into this fight, but they had been going at it for many, many years prior. And the final toll of all of this was 22 million people are killed throughout the course of this war. Half of those people are civilians, and then 10 million of those people are refugees. So this is a really, really large number, and a big number of that can be attributed absolutely to the trench warfare. Remember, if you can, all the way back to a pre-corona world, we were talking about how little movement is made within trench warfare. Throughout the entire course of the war, those trenches may be moved somewhere between 5 and 9 miles as a whole. So there was a lot of opportunity for people to get killed, and boy, howdy, did plenty of people get killed in the process of all of this. Alrighty, guys. Well, that's where we are going to end it for today. Figure, we're jumping back into it. We'll kind of do so and not go too crazy. We'll pump the brakes a little bit there for you. So here's what you need to do. You need to go on to Google Classroom and you need to answer the questions and fill in the terms that go along with this, just like what we do with our notes in class. Okay? So make sure that you do that. Now, moving forward, and you guys can actually start to do this right now, moving forward, I am going to be expecting that you guys are typing the notes out onto a Google Classroom document or a Google Docs document. Okay? It does not have to be 2-column, but I do need to see that they are typed out by you, along with filling in the questions and the summary and all that kind of stuff. Now, the questions and the summary are going to be a separate assignment within Google Classroom. So make sure that you are turning in your notes and your questions and whatnot all in that place. If you have any questions on that, please make sure to shoot me an email as soon as possible. Ladies and gentlemen, this is our new norm, at least for the moment, so let's try to make the best of it. Get on it. Let me know if you guys need anything. Have an awesome rest of your day.